Hey guys, tonight we go quietly into one of the most overlooked decades in American history. Not the one with the flapper dresses and the jazz clubs and the automobiles, but the one running right beside it, where roughly 4 million women woke up every morning in charge of children and short on everything else. Not the shimmy, not the gin, not the Charleston. The other 20s, the one with the coal bill, the broken shoe, and a county pension office that was very sorry but had simply run out of money. If you've been here a while, you know the routine. Go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely like falling asleep to the history that never made it onto the party invitations. And a tip of the hat to whoever sent this topic in. I appreciate it deeply, and I'll be adding suitable home standards to the running list of phrases that keep me up at night. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Somewhere out there it's 2 a.m, the way it always seems to be. And a few of you, statistically, are tuned in from a room that's a little too cold, with a window you've been meaning to fix for about 3 weeks. You're doing fine. Turn the lamp down low, let a fan hum somewhere in the corner, and burrow under the covers, a second blanket if you've got one. Since tonight we're wintering in a 2-room boarding house flat where the coal gave out on Thursday, and you won't stay one woman tonight. You'll be a widow counting coins in a Chicago boarding house, a domestic in someone else's southern kitchen, a farm wife standing in a field she can't afford to plant, an immigrant writing letters to the one newspaper that answers in her language. 4 million households, and no 2 of them woke up in quite the same trouble, same decade, same arithmetic, different kitchen. Have you ever wondered what a decade of supposed liberation actually felt like when liberation cost money you didn't have? What happened when the influenza took your husband in November and by January the landlord still needed rent? How did you get a divorce in 1922 when the lawyer cost more than 6 weeks of laundry wages, and Nevada was theoretically an option for someone who wasn't you? Did the pension ever actually arrive, or did it just get approved in principle and then evaporate into a county budget that was already exhausted when you applied? The suitable home clause, who decided what suitable meant, and did that person ever see your kitchen? Could you survive being 31 years old, in charge of 4 children, legally unable to sign a contract, earning 43 cents for every dollar the man next to you took home? And the shoes. At what point do you stop replacing the cardboard lining and start making different calculations entirely? Congratulations, you've just woken up in Chicago, Illinois, 1923. It is 5:15 in the morning. The flat is cold, and there is 1 egg left. Good luck. You wake before the children because the money has to be counted while it's quiet. There are coins in a tin on the shelf, and you already know the number, but you count it again anyway, the way you check a door you already locked. Today the number has to cover rent, coal, and a quart of milk, and it does not. So you set the milk aside in your head first, then the coal. The rent you leave for last, because the rent is the one that knocks. The tin holds $1.14. A quart of milk is 14 cents. A loaf of bread is 10. Salt pork for the week runs about 30, if you buy the end cut, which you have, since 1922. The math doesn't change. You run it anyway, because running it is the only part of the household you control at 5 in the morning, before anyone else is awake. Here's what the work pays. Women's median annual wages in 1920 are about $525. Men's are $1,215. The federal government has printed this figure in official reports. Nobody in an official capacity has found this troubling. You earn, at the laundry, between $10 and $14 for a 54-hour week in a room that hits 100 degrees by July, thick with lye soap and bleach and a steam that sits in your lungs and will not quite leave, 43 cents on the dollar. Printed, filed, and moved on from. The rent is $3.50 a week for 2 rooms that share a wall with a family of 5 and a stovepipe that clangs in a north wind. The landlord is not cruel. He is just present, reliably, on Fridays. The rooms aren't bad. They're just small the way a held breath is small, close, grey and temporary. Mrs. Nowak across the hall slides a note under your door sometimes. Her handwriting is very small, as if she's rationing ink. Last week the note said her eldest was home with a cough and could your Clara watch the baby on Thursday. Clara is 11. She holds the baby the way someone holds a baby when they've been doing it since they were 6. Competent. Not cheerful about it. The baby doesn't seem to mind. The children's shoes are the next line you can't escape. A pair runs between $1.50 and $3. They last about 4 months before the sole separates or the toe punches through. In the meantime, cardboard, cut to the shape of a shoe with a hole in it. You've gotten fast at the cutting. You do it in under a minute now, which is not a skill you planned to develop. The coal ran out before the cold did. That was February. You burned 2 chair legs and some scrap wood from the building site on Halstead and told the children it was camping, and Clara looked at you the way 11-year-olds look when they understand but have decided not to say so. A ton of coal costs somewhere between $10 and $14. You've been buying it in half-hundredweight bags because the ton is not a thing you have at once. Nothing is a thing you have at once. Of course there's a pension. 40 states passed mothers' pension laws before 1920. Cook County can authorize a payment of about $15 a month for a mother with 2 children. You have 4. The 2-room apartment runs 8 to 14. The pension is real, legally speaking, the way a painted door is real, convincing right up until you reach for the handle. The county funds are exhausted until January. You can reapply. The form is on the second shelf. Fewer than 3% of widows with children ever receive any pension at all, which makes it less a safety net than a persistent rumour someone's aunt benefited from once. You count the coins again. $14. The number has not changed. You already knew it wouldn't. You put the lid back on the tin and start the water for oatmeal before the children begin to move. You go to the county office to apply for the mother's pension, and you bring everything they asked for: the death certificate, the rent receipts, the names and ages of the children written out in your own hand. You sit on a wooden bench in a hallway with other women holding the same papers, and you wait for a clerk to call a number that is, today, your name. The form runs 4 pages. The form wants to know whether your home is suitable. You have not yet been told who gets to decide that. The pension, if it comes, is $15 a month for a mother with 2 children. Your 2 rooms take 8 to 14 of that. Food, coal, clothing, and the gap between your wages and your rent come out of whatever is left, which is a number the form has arranged not to look at directly. You write your figure in the box. The box is small, and so is the figure. A caseworker named Mrs. Draper comes to your home before any decision is made. She arrives on a Tuesday without notice, which is by design. She looks at your curtains. She looks at your children's faces. She looks at whether there is a man's coat on the hook by the door, because a man's coat would end the conversation. You watch her write something down. She doesn't show you what. The notepad goes back into her bag with the same small click a verdict makes. Mrs. Draper writes "suitable home" at the top of the page, and the word does the rest. She sits at the same desk all week. On Tuesday, she approves a Polish widow, signs the line, sets the folder in the left tray. On Thursday, she visits a woman from the South Side, a home that is clean, orderly, and quiet, with 3 children and a floor scrubbed that morning, and she closes the file for reasons the paperwork describes as administrative. She does not write down the floor. She moves the folder to the right tray and reaches for the next one. Clean enough is whatever she decides clean enough is. Morally fit is a phrase that points mostly at you and nowhere else, and it points faster if you are African American, because the standard was built to. Fewer than 3% of widows with children receive any pension at all during the 1920s, which makes it less a safety net than a rumour of one, the kind of rumour you stand in a hallway for 2 hours to investigate anyway, because the alternative is not investigating it. 2 weeks after the visit, a letter arrives. Mrs. F. A Polish widow 2 doors down from you got the same letter last spring. Approved in principle. County funds exhausted for the current quarter. Reapply in January. Mrs. F. Reapplied in January. The January letter said March. The March letter said the caseworker had changed and the file needed to be reopened, which is basically a bank that approves your loan, shakes your hand, and then mentions it has no money, but keeps your signed copy, so technically you're a customer. You fold the letter. You put it with the others. On the wooden bench in the hallway next week, there will be another woman with a death certificate and 4 pages of form, and she will wait the same number of hours for the same clerk to read her the same outcome in a slightly different sentence. The bench knows this already. The bench has always known. You are told that your pension has been approved, and for a moment you let yourself believe the word means what it usually means. Then the clerk explains the rest of the sentence. The county's funds for the year are exhausted. Your application is sound, your need is real, your children are exactly as hungry as you said they were, and there is no money in the account the law pointed you toward. You should reapply, the clerk says, in January. It is March. You do the subtraction standing up, in the hallway. The pension law itself is real. 40 states passed one. The state of Illinois passed one in 1911, which made Illinois sound progressive. And it was. In the same way a restaurant that takes your reservation and then mentions the kitchen is closed is technically still a restaurant. The funding was always county administered, which meant a woman could qualify under state law inside a county that had simply spent its allocation on other things, or hadn't collected it, or had set it aside for a category she didn't fit. Qualifying and receiving were two separate events with no obligation to occur in the same year. Let's talk about the number itself. A Cook County mother with 2 children was eligible for roughly $15 a month. A 2-room apartment on the south side ran 8 to 14. That left somewhere between $1 and $7 for everything else. Coal, bread, shoes, the bones you were going to boil twice, the quart of milk at 14 cents, counted against everything. The arithmetic wasn't complicated. It was just always negative. Mrs. Walchak, the intake worker on Tuesdays, slides your folder back across the counter with 2 fingers and doesn't look up. She has done this before. Her face is calm, tired, and entirely unsurprised. The folder has a stamp on it that says approved and a handwritten note underneath that says pending allocation. Both things are true. Neither thing helps. Of course, you knew women this happened to. Your neighbour on the 3rd floor, a Polish widow named Frances, was approved in principle in October. She reapplied in January as instructed. She was told February. She is still telling the story in August, which is its own kind of answer. The pension was less a safety net than a rumour, the kind that travels through a building fast and delivers nothing when you follow it to its source. And there's the other thing the clerk didn't say out loud. Fewer than 3% of widows with children received any pension payment at all during this decade. 3%. The rest applied, were told to wait, were told to reapply, were found unsuitable, or gave up after the 3rd visit and went back to taking in laundry. The 10-cent streetcar fare to the county office cost something. The half-day off work cost more. A married woman in several states still can't sign a contract without her husband's name on it, and your husband is buried, or vanished, or somewhere in Ohio not answering letters. So the county board needs a signature in the place where his would go, and the pension is the form that signature comes on. The board meets in a room you will never see. The men at the table read your file the way they read all of them, looking for the kind of woman they find easy to approve. White, native-born, neatly housed, churched, widowed by something respectable like a war. They have budgeted for a fraction of the women they made eligible. They reach the bottom of the list before they reach you. You walk back out onto the sidewalk. The folder is still in your hands because you forgot to leave it. The streetcar back costs the same as it cost coming. Your eldest daughter, 11, is home minding the other 3. She has been home minding the other 3 since 7 this morning. The coal ran out before the coal did, and you haven't told her yet. January is 10 months away. You already know you won't wait for January. You are handed your wages on Saturday in a small brown envelope, and you count it before you leave the floor, because once you step through the door, the number is final. 54 hours are folded inside it. The week was 6 days long, and each day was 9 hours, and the envelope holds $12, give or take whatever the fines took. You already know where most of it is going before you reach the street. The envelope is thin enough to fold once and forget it's even there. Rent is first. It always is. The 2-room flat runs $10 a month, which sounds manageable until you also need to eat, and you have 4 children who share your understanding of the word hungry. You have mentally paid the rent before the envelope is in your pocket. What remains is the distance between $12 and the rest of the month, and that distance is mostly wishful thinking and dried beans. Let's talk about the beans. A pound costs a few cents and makes a pot that lasts 2 days if you stretch it with water and a heel of bread. Bread is 10 cents a loaf. Milk is 14 cents a quart, and you count that against everything else before you let yourself want it. Salt pork comes in on Sundays when there is enough, and sometimes there isn't. The bones, when you have them, go into the pot twice, just to be sure. The second pot is thinner. You serve it like it isn't. The shoes are a separate problem with their own arithmetic. Your youngest went through a pair in 4 months, which is not a failure of the shoes so much as a policy position they've taken. You've cut cardboard to the shape of the sole twice now, fitted it in at night, and handed the shoe back in the morning like nothing happened. The cardboard holds for about a week before it absorbs enough cold and damp to give up entirely. There's a charitable distribution in December. It is October. Meanwhile, the coal ran out before the cold did. A ton runs $11 when the price is fair, which it often isn't near the end of the season when the yard knows you're low. You burned 2 chair rungs in March. You told the children it was a special kind of wood. Vera, who is 7, accepted this. Thomas, who is 9, did not, but said nothing because Thomas has been saying nothing about a great many things since his father left, and that particular silence has its own particular weight. The envelope has a cousin, which is the weekly visit from the insurance man. He comes on Tuesdays, a Mr. Brandt, who wears the same hat regardless of weather and writes your payment in a small book with a pencil he keeps behind his ear. You pay him 10 cents. 10 cents is 10 cents, and some weeks it costs you the same effort as the whole $12, but the policy pays $500, and $500 is the difference between a crisis and a catastrophe. You've seen what happens when a woman has neither. It's basically a subscription service, except the only person who gets to cancel is the one who dies. Your eldest, Clara, is 11. Clara does not go to school on Mondays, which is washing day, because the 3 younger ones need minding and you cannot be in 2 places at once, and the laundry will not wait. Clara minds them with a competence that would embarrass most adults and a face that has learned to look neutral while doing it. She feeds them at noon. She keeps Thomas from breaking things. She reports to you at 6 with a summary of the day delivered in a tone that is flat, level, and entirely unsurprised, the tone of someone who has stopped expecting the day to be different. She is 11. She is very good at this. That is not a thing to be proud of. The envelope, counted and folded, gets you to the end of the month if nothing unexpected happens. Nothing unexpected is a very high standard. A cough that won't clear. A broken window latch that lets the cold in. A fine on Friday because your machine ran 3 minutes slow. The envelope doesn't argue. It just gets smaller, a little at a time, until it's Saturday again and you're back on the floor counting. You spend the day moving wet cloth from one scalding tub to the next, and your hands learn the work long before your mind agrees to it. The water is hot enough to redden your forearms past the elbow, and the lie finds every crack in your skin and announces itself. You wring, you lift, you carry, and then you do all 3 again, and the only measure of progress is a pile that refuses to shrink. By noon the air is past 100 degrees. You are not, of course, allowed to say so. The laundry runs 6 days a week and employs roughly 40 women, most of whom you know by sight and some by name and a few by the specific sound of their cough. There's Vera, who works the mangle press with the focused concentration of a woman who has recently lost a fingertip and does not plan to lose another. She feeds the linen through in one smooth motion, watching the rollers, not you, not anything else. Just the rollers. This is a reasonable policy. Let's talk about the smell. It isn't one smell. It's bleach on top of steam, on top of lye soap, on top of whatever the sheets themselves brought in, which varies and is not always worth thinking about. By 8 in the morning it has settled into your hair, your dress, the soft skin behind your ears. You will smell it at dinner. You will smell it when you close your eyes. The sheets will have moved on to someone else's guest room by then, clean, pressed, and entirely unaware of you. The noise is its own problem. Drums turning, water slapping, the periodic crack of the mangle. It crowds out thought, which is sometimes useful and sometimes the opposite, depending on what you are trying not to think about. You land somewhere between the 2 most mornings. Clara is home with the younger ones. Thomas will sit near the window if you ask him to. The rent is current, which is the correct order of priorities, and does not make any of them feel better. Your 10-minute break arrives at a time the floor manager considers mid-morning and your body considers approximately never. You sit on an overturned tub and eat half your bread now and save the rest for 3 o'clock, which requires a discipline that other people, in other decades, will attempt to replicate using expensive apps. A woman next to you says her boy has a cough that won't clear. You say you're sorry. She says it's been 2 months. Neither of you says the word you are both thinking, because saying it in a room this hot feels like an invitation. The afternoon is the same as the morning, only longer. Your wrists ache in a way that has become so routine they barely register as pain anymore, more a kind of editorial comment from your skeleton. You switch sides when one arm tires and pretend this constitutes rest. The pile does, eventually, shrink. Wet linen gets folded, pressed, stacked. At 5:30 the whistle sounds and the room releases everyone into the street at once. 40 women spilling out onto pavement that still holds the day's heat. You earn between $10 and $14 for this week, depending on whether Saturday's half shift is counted, and it will be counted the way the floor manager chooses to count it, which is not a system you designed. The envelope will come Friday. You already know where every cent is going. The knowing is not comforting, it's just efficient, the way cardboard in a shoe is efficient. It solves the immediate problem and defers a more specific kind of cold. On the walk home, you pass a pharmacy with a sign about a tonic for nervous exhaustion. The woman in the illustration is reclining. She appears to have time for that. You are offered a live-in position in a good house, with room and board and a few dollars a week on top, and you understand almost at once that the offer is also a trap. The room is for you. The board is for you. Neither is for your children, who cannot follow you up into an employer's attic, so you weigh the live-out position instead, which pays less precisely because it feeds you nothing. Both jobs want all your hours. Only one of them lets you keep the children in sight. Let's talk about domestic service. In 1923, a live-in domestic earns between $5 and $10 a week, plus meals and a bed. A live-out domestic earns slightly less and subtracts her own food and transit on top of that. Southern black women in the same work earn $2 to $4 a week, sometimes paid in the form of leftover pot roast and a coat the mistress no longer wants. The coat has no agreed-upon dollar value. Nobody assigns it one. The arithmetic of live-in service is fast and brutal. Room and board solved. Children not mentioned. The lady of the house in Evanston shows you the attic room, clean, narrow, and warm, and explains the hours, and at no point in the explanation is there a place to set down an infant. You cannot carry your 7-year-old up those stairs, and you cannot leave her at the bottom of them. You do this sum in the good parlour while the woman waits for a yes. The position has no clause for the children. The position has no second page. This is where the neighbour comes in. Mrs. Grabowski on the second floor watches 2 children for 25 cents a day if you're lucky, and for a favour, you haven't named yet if you're not. She has 3 of her own. Her apartment smells like cabbage and kerosene and the particular exhaustion of a woman who stopped counting how many people she was responsible for sometime around 1917. She doesn't ask for a contract. She doesn't want one. Contracts are for people with leverage. And then there's your eldest daughter. She is 11. She is quick with numbers and good at keeping the younger ones from crying too loudly, and she has not been to school in 6 days, which is the kind of sentence that gets written in a caseworker's notes with a neutral pen. She manages the baby in the morning, heats the milk, cuts the bread, and sits in the window in the afternoon waiting for the sound of your shoes on the stairs. She is not your childcare plan. She is your only one. The Hull House Day Nursery in Chicago holds roughly 25 children at a time, which is essentially a lifeboat with a wait list. The fee is 5 to 15 cents per day. You know about it the way you know about a lot of things in this city. Somebody mentioned it, once, in a laundry room, and by the time you looked into it there were already 40 names ahead of yours. The nursery is real. The spot is theoretical. A live-out domestic named Stella, who keeps her coat on indoors, a cast-off from a mistress who moved to Philadelphia and which Stella has decided still counts, leaves her building at 5:45 every morning. Her youngest is asleep. Her oldest, who is 8, knows not to open the door. The bread is on the table under a cloth. The door is locked from outside. Stella walks to the streetcar stop and does not look back because looking back doesn't change the arithmetic. By the end of the week, Stella has earned $9. She owes $4.50 in rent, $1.50 to Mrs. Grabowski, and approximately 80 cents in streetcar fares. What remains has to cover bread, milk, coal, if the bin is low, and the specific shoe situation that has been developing since October. It doesn't cover all of them at once. It never does. You make the list, then you make the choices, and the choice is always which problem gets worse this month. A woman at the laundry leans over the washboard and tells you about a household on the North Shore that pays $12 a week and lets the cook keep a child in the kitchen. You ask her the family's name. She doesn't have it. She heard it from her cousin, who heard it from someone on Halsted Street, and the name dissolves before you reach the door, so you stop asking. You try to find a place for the children while you work, and you start with the day nursery, because the day nursery is the respectable answer. It costs a few cents a day, which you can almost manage, and it is run by people who plainly mean well, which helps less than you'd hope. The trouble is the size of it. The nursery holds 25 children. The neighborhood holds thousands. You put your name on the list and ask where you fall on it, and the woman holding the list does not quite answer. The Hull House Nursery on Halstead Street charges 5 cents a day, sometimes 15 if they think you can manage it. The building smells like oilcloth and warm milk and the particular exhaustion of women doing charitable work at full speed. A volunteer named Miss Brennan moves through the room adjusting small hats with the focused efficiency of someone reshelving library books. She knows the names of every child and the situation of every mother, and she writes both down in a ledger that is already running out of pages. Of course, 25 spaces against a neighbourhood of several thousand children produces a certain kind of mathematics, and it has never once come out in your favour. The waitlist is not technically a waitlist. It is a list that exists, and you are on it, and the list does not move the way a real waitlist moves. It is basically a gift card valid everywhere except the counter you're standing at, so you make other arrangements. The arrangements are your upstairs neighbour, Mrs. Holt, who watches 2 children already and takes on a third with the look of someone accepting a package they didn't order. She charges 30 cents a week, cash, and you bring it up on Monday morning, folded inside your handkerchief, because that is how you do this when there's no contract and no receipt, and the whole system runs on a handshake you can't afford to break. This is where your daughter comes in. Her name is Clara. She is 11. On days when Mrs. Holt is unavailable, sick, travelling, overwhelmed, or simply not answering the door, Clara does not go to school. She stays home and minds the younger two, which she does with the gravity of a person who has understood the situation completely and resents it at the right amount. She heats the soup. She keeps the baby from the stairs. She is 11. The teachers at her school have noted her absences 3 times in writing. The letters come home folded into thirds, addressed to a parent the system assumes is available to receive them at midday. Clara delivers them without comment. You read them without comment. You both know what the letters are about and what can be done about it, which is nothing, and then you both go on with the day. Say you came up from the south with the Great Migration and settled on the south side. You go looking for a nursery and find that there are fewer here, not more. The settlement houses that run them sit over on the near west side, a streetcar and a transfer away. You climb the stairs to the one office someone named for you and find the same empty front room, the same list that doesn't move, the same volunteer who is polite, brisk, and careful never quite to meet your eye. The suitable home standard that trailed you through the pension office is waiting here too, in a quiet address. It doesn't tell you no, it just never gets around to yes. By July, the heat in the tenement floors where children spend unsupervised days climbs past anything reasonable. Infants who haven't learned to ask for water don't ask. The newspapers track heat mortality in August the way they track rain. Expected, seasonal, a fact of the calendar. A neighbour on your block loses a baby on a Tuesday. She is back at work by Friday. She does not have the option that would let her not be. You leave the eldest in charge because there is no one else, and she is 11, and she already knows the job by heart. You tell her the things you tell her every morning. Keep the little ones off the stairs. Don't open the door for anyone. The bread is on the shelf. I'll be home when the light goes. She nods the way a much older person nods. She has stayed home from school so often the teacher has stopped marking her absence with any surprise. You close the door on a household run by a child. Let's talk about what she actually does in there. She warms the leftover porridge on the stove, standing on a wooden crate to reach the burner, making sure nobody leans too close to the flame. She changes the youngest's wrappings. She arbitrates a dispute about who owns the corner of the blanket. By 9 in the morning, she has already performed the full domestic labour of a functioning adult, except she cannot read the clock yet with full confidence. So she tracks the day by the light on the east wall. The east wall is her watch. It has never been wrong, as far as she knows. A settlement house visitor came through last winter with a clipboard and a careful, even, and unhurried hand. She wrote your daughter into the record without a name. Older sibling present, approximately 10 to 12 years. She has written that same line in 100 other apartments on the near west side, because the 11-year-old at the stove is the most common form of childcare in 1920s America, and nobody is counting it as childcare. At the school, the teacher marks your daughter absent, then marks her absent again, then stops writing it down at all, because after enough entries the column starts to look like a mistake. The pen lifts off the page. She has gone from one book the same morning her mother went missing from another. Meanwhile, the 3 younger ones have opinions. The 2-year-old has opinions loudly and at length. The 4-year-old has discovered that throwing a wooden spool behind the radiator produces a satisfying sound in a crisis. By mid-morning, your 11-year-old has developed the specific 1,000-yard stare of a woman who has been managing a small, chaotic institution since sunrise. She will have this look, in some form, for the rest of her life. She came by it honestly and early. The bread is on the shelf. She counts it. There are 4 of them, and the bread is for the middle of the day and cannot also be for the morning, so she tells the 4-year-old it isn't ready yet. The 4-year-old doesn't believe her. This is a negotiation she conducts 3 times before noon. The bread holds, barely. A neighbor named Mrs. Varga checks in around 10, knocking twice the way she always does. Your daughter opens the door for Mrs. Varga because Mrs. Varga is on the approved list, though the list has never been written anywhere. It lives in her head next to the recipe for the thin soup and the instructions for what to do if the youngest starts coughing in a certain way. Mrs. Varga hands through a heel of rye bread, says nothing specific, and leaves. Your daughter puts the heel on the shelf next to the other bread and does not eat it. It's for later. She already understands later in a way that most adults find difficult. By the time you come home, when the light goes, the way you promised, she has done 4 loads of minding, settled 2 injuries, eaten almost nothing, and kept everyone off the stairs. She hands you the youngest without ceremony, the way a very tired surgeon hands off a patient at the end of a shift. You ask if everything was fine. She says yes. She doesn't elaborate because there's nothing to elaborate. This is just Tuesday. You live by the landlady's rules because the landlady owns the roof, and the rules are written down nowhere except in her memory, which is excellent. Rent is due on the day she says it's due. The meal plan costs extra, and the size of the portion is hers alone to decide. You do not bring guests up the stairs, you do not cook in the room, and you do not fall behind, because falling behind is the one rule with teeth. None of these rules is written down anywhere, which makes them not legally enforceable and absolutely enforced. You learn her moods the way you'd learn weather. You plan the week around the forecast. The room costs $3 to $6 a week, depending on the building, the floor, and how much the landlady likes you. Add a meal plan and you're at 8, sometimes 9. A 2-room apartment runs 8 to 14. The arithmetic is not in your favor, but the arithmetic has never been in your favor, so you've developed a calm relationship with it. You pay what's due. You smile on the landing. You do not ask about the smell in the wall. The other women in the building are, like you, operating on a private budget they don't discuss. The widow on the 2nd floor has a son who shines shoes on weekday afternoons and hands her the coins without being asked. The woman across the hall does piecework, collars, buttonholes by the window until the light goes, then closer to the lamp than her eyes can really manage. You nod at each other in the mornings. You share information carefully. Who's hiring? Which corner grocery extends credit? Whether Mrs. Benedetti downstairs is in a lenient mood or not. Mrs. Benedetti, for her part, has a system. She stands in the hallway on Friday evenings holding a small ledger the size of a prayer book, and she reads from it in a manner that is calm, precise, and entirely unhurried. She doesn't shout. She doesn't threaten. She simply recites numbers in a tone that suggests the numbers themselves are doing the threatening, which they are. The ledger has an opinion about you. That opinion is currently outstanding. The room is small enough that the furniture has to cooperate. The bed and the chair have reached an understanding about the available floor space. There's a washstand, a hook behind the door, and a window that sticks unless the weather is cooperating, which it isn't in January or in July. In July, the room stores heat like a ceramic pot left near a stove. It doesn't release it. It just holds it, hour after hour, breathing it back at you while you try to sleep. Infant mortality spikes every July in buildings like this. The neighbors know the pattern. They watch each other's babies during heat waves with the specific attention of people who have learned what happens when you don't. You don't cook in the room. Mrs. Benedetti was very clear. But a small tin of condensed milk in the window frame is not cooking. It's storage. And the difference is a point of theology you've decided not to raise. The bread and the beans live under the bed in a cloth bag. A heel of bread left from Tuesday. Some salt. If you had a potato, you'd have a meal. You have most of a potato. Tuberculosis moves through buildings like this quietly and with patience, killing about 100,000 Americans a year as late as 1927, which is a number that sounds large until you're living in a room with poor ventilation and a shared stairwell where 3 people have coughed all winter. The disease is not dramatic. It's just persistent. It notes the overcrowding, the damp, the diet of bread and beans, and it files the information away. It is, in this way, a little like the ledger. What you have, against all of this, is the network on the landing. It's not organized. Nobody runs it. It's just the accumulated intelligence of women who can't afford to be wrong, who has a contact at which relief office, whose landlady accepts a day late without comment, which pharmacy will hold a bill until the end of the month. The widow on the second floor learned last Thursday that a dry goods shop on Halstead is hiring. She told the woman with the buttonholes. Who told you? You're going Monday. The landlady doesn't know about any of this. She knows rent. She knows lateness. She knows the sound of your particular footstep on her stairs and whether it sounds confident or not. You have learned to sound confident. It costs nothing. You buy coal in the smallest amount the dealer will sell you, because a whole ton is a sum you cannot keep in one place at one time. The cold, unfortunately, does not believe in installments. You feed the stove carefully, a little at a time, and you watch the pile shrink faster than the season does. And when the coal runs out before the cold does, which it will, you already know what burns next. A broken chair burns. A wooden crate burns. You have made the list well in advance. A ton of coal runs $10 to $14 in 1922 Chicago, which is roughly a month's rent for a woman who cannot afford a month's rent. You buy a half bushel at a time from the coal man on the corner, who accepts this without judgment, because you are not the only one. He has a book. You are in the book. Most of the building is in the book. The coal man's book is, in its way, a more accurate census of economic distress in this neighborhood than anything the federal government has managed to produce. The stove is not a stove. It's a negotiation. You feed it exactly as much as you can spare, and it produces exactly as much heat as it feels like producing, which is not always the same thing. It ticks when it warms. It pops when it cools. At 3 a.m, when the temperature in the room drops below 40, it makes a sound like a small argument with itself. You wake up. You add a piece of the broken crate from the hallway. The crate had been leaning there for 2 weeks. You knew what it was for. The children sleep in their coats when it gets bad enough. Your youngest doesn't notice anymore, which is either adaptation or a thing you don't let yourself think about too carefully. You pull the blanket up over both of them and tuck the edges under the mattress the way a field surgeon would close something. The motion is quick, careful, and entirely practiced. Efficient, precise. No extra motion. Mister. Hennessy down the hall burns his dining chairs one winter. Not the whole set, just the 2 that were already wobbly. He carries them to the stove in pieces, methodically, the way someone might file paperwork. By February he is eating standing up. This is not considered remarkable on this floor. It is considered Tuesday. The coal smoke doesn't stay in your apartment. It lives in the building, in the street, in the neighborhood, mixing with cooking smoke and horse manure and whatever the factory 3 blocks east is exhaling today. You don't smell it anymore. Your children have never known air that didn't have this particular texture. It sits in the back of the throat like a reminder that hasn't finished reminding you yet. Some women switch to kerosene when coal runs short, rationing it the way you'd ration medicine, a few inches in the lamp, enough to do handwork by before the light fails. You've learned to sew near the window in daylight and save the kerosene for after the children are asleep, which is the only hour that belongs to you, and even then it's borrowed. The kerosene lamp judges the amount remaining every time you look at it. It has strong opinions about how much you have left. You shop for food the way other people diffuse something, slowly and with your full attention, because every coin spent here is a coin not spent on something equally necessary. Bread runs about 10 cents a loaf. Milk is 14 to 16 cents a quart, and the children need it, so the milk becomes the number you build the rest of the week around. Beans, potatoes, a little salt pork, you buy whatever stretches furthest. You stand at the stall doing sums that the woman waiting behind you is also doing. Feeding a mother and 2 or 3 children costs somewhere between $12 and $18 a month if you are careful. If you are not careful, it costs the same amount, and you run out anyway. You boil a soup bone on Monday, you boil it again on Wednesday. The bone doesn't complain. It just gets quieter each time, surrendering less, until by Thursday it's basically philosophical about the whole arrangement. The vegetable peelings go in too, carrot tops, potato skins, because throwing them away is a luxury with a price you can calculate exactly. The milk is the line you guard hardest. You don't buy a full quart every day. Some days you buy a pint. Some days you water it slightly, which is a thing you do and do not say aloud. Not to the children, not to the neighbour, not to anyone. The children are small. They don't know what full-strength milk tastes like with the kind of authority that would let them complain. You know, you remember, you move on. Marta Szymański, 3 buildings down, keeps a small notebook in her apron pocket with every purchase written in pencil. Bread, potatoes, lard. She runs her finger down the column every evening at the kitchen table, her lips moving slightly as if the numbers might change if she reads them quietly enough. They don't change. The notebook just fills up. Children's shoes cost between $1.50 and $3, depending on the shop and how much the shopkeeper likes you. They wear through in months, not seasons, months. By November, you are cutting cardboard to the shape of your eldest daughter's foot and pressing it flat against the inside sole, which buys you another 2 or 3 weeks before the cardboard itself goes soft in the slush. The charitable shoe distributions happen in winter, at church halls and settlement houses, and you learn which lines move fast and which volunteers ask fewer questions. You go to both? A quart of milk at 15 cents, bread at 10, a pound of beans at 8, salt pork when you can get it. Against that, rent, coal, shoes, the children's cough that started in October and hasn't quite stopped. The numbers don't sit still like a budget. They move on you, steady, grey and unconcerned, the way weather moves, a permanent condition you dress for rather than solve. You don't budget so much as decide each week which need gets to go unmet without anyone dying of it. The woman at the next stall sells day-old bread for a nickel. You buy it. It's harder, but bread is bread, and the children eat it without ceremony because they haven't learned yet that fresh bread is a different category of thing. That particular education is one you're in no hurry to provide. Feed them first. Eat what's left. There's usually something left. You deal with the children's shoes constantly because children's shoes are a problem that regenerates. A pair costs $1.50 if you're fortunate and $3 if you're not, and the children wear straight through them in a single season, the way only growing feet can. When a hole opens in a sole, you cut a piece of cardboard to the shape of the foot and slide it in, and it works perfectly well until it rains. In winter, the church hands out shoes to whoever lines up. You line up. The line isn't short. It's a Tuesday morning in December, and the women standing in it have the particular posture of people who've been waiting a long time in the cold and have decided not to acknowledge the cold, their faces patient, blank, and carefully unbothered. A woman 3 places ahead of you has a baby on one hip and a boy of about 4 at her knee. The boy is wearing shoes. You can see the cardboard peeking out the side, the same pale rectangle as yours, which makes it less a line and more a seminar. Coal runs about $12 a ton in 1922, which sounds manageable until it isn't, which is usually February. When the coal runs out before the cold does, you burn what's available. First the wood you've saved, then whatever the construction site 2 blocks over left unsecured overnight. Then, if it comes to it, the chair with the wobbly leg that you've been meaning to fix anyway. The chair doesn't mind. The chair understands it has reached a second purpose. Mrs. Helena Brechko, who lives on the floor above you, and is also a widow and also has 3 children, has a system. She does all the handwork, the mending, the hemming, the patching of elbows, beside the window while there's still daylight, because kerosene costs money and candles cost money and good light is free until 4 o'clock. After 4, she stops. Not because the work is done, it's never done, but because after 4 the light is gone, and spending money to see is a luxury she's classified as optional. She has opinions about what's optional. Her opinions are correct. The clothing question runs just behind the shoe question and slightly ahead of the fuel question, which means you're managing a small rotating catastrophe at all times. You let seams out until there's nothing left to let. You cut a coat down and sew it smaller. You receive a bag of cast-off clothes from a neighbour, who received it from a neighbour before that, and you go through it on the floor on a Sunday afternoon with the children, which functions as both inventory and entertainment. The children have opinions about the cast-offs. You have opinions about their opinions. A settlement house volunteer, a young woman named Miss Erickson with a clipboard she holds the way a doctor holds a stethoscope, comes to the door one Thursday and asks about your household budget. She writes everything down with great seriousness. The rent, the coal, the food, the shoes. She totals the column. She looks at the total. She looks at you. She writes something else, which is not the total but appears to be a note about the total. She tells you there are resources available and that you should come to the office on Halsted Street with documentation. You ask what documentation. She consults the clipboard. She says, most documentation. You do not go to Halsted Street. You've done the math on what going to Halsted Street costs in terms of an afternoon off work, car fare, and the documentation that you do not entirely have, and the numbers don't favour the trip. This is how most of the available resources stay available. They're available in the same way Nevada is available, technically true, practically distant, requiring resources you'd spend on the thing you're trying to solve. The cardboard in the shoe gets replaced every few weeks. You cut it from whatever's on hand, a cereal box, a paper bag, the stiff backing of a calendar from 1921 that you've kept specifically for this. By spring, you'll know which thickness holds longest and which kind of cardboard goes soft fastest in the wet. This is not a skill anyone teaches you. You develop it the way you develop all the skills that keep this household running, through trial, through error, and through the fact that there is no one else available to learn it instead. You could, in theory, sue him for support, and a clerk will cheerfully tell you so, as if the theory were the difficult part. In practice, the theory is the easy part. First, you have to find him, which means knowing which city he chose and which name he is using once he got there. Then you have to pay a lawyer to bring the case, which costs more than the case is ever likely to return. Then, if you win, you still have to collect. Each of the 3 steps can defeat you entirely on its own. The lawyer's fee runs $50 or more. That is several weeks of laundry work, stacked in a pile, and handed to a man in a suit who will file paperwork and wait for a man who has already demonstrated he is not interested in being found. Some women visit the lawyer's office once, sit in the chair, hear the number, and stand back up. The chair doesn't argue. First you find him. He might be in Cleveland. He might be in Cincinnati under his brother's last name. He might be 3 blocks away under his own name, which is somehow the hardest version to prove. Without an address that a court will accept, the case doesn't proceed. Without the case proceeding, the support order doesn't exist. Without the support order, the collection doesn't happen. It is a very tidy sequence of nothing. If you do locate him, if a neighbour mentions a city, if the National Desertion Bureau has a file, if his photograph has appeared in the forward alongside 200 other men who also had somewhere else to be, you can try. The Bureau tracks thousands of them. It's basically LinkedIn, except the only thing on the profile is that he left. Some men are found. Some men pay briefly and stop. The Bureau marks the case resolved. You mark the case something else. A judge signs the support order, which sounds like a solution until you try to use one. The husband is notified. If he has moved across a state line, which many of them have, the order becomes a document with strong feelings and no jurisdiction, official, sealed, and entirely toothless. You can win the case completely and collect nothing, which are 2 separate achievements that feel, in your kitchen at 7 in the morning, like one. Rosa Valente, a neighbour 2 floors below, went through all 3 steps. She found him in Pittsburgh. She borrowed the lawyer's fee from her sister. She won. The support order specified $4 a week, which would have covered the milk and the bread and left something for the gas meter. He paid for 6 weeks. Then he moved. The order did not move with him. The $4 a week became a number written on a piece of paper that Rosa keeps in the flour tin, which is where she keeps things that used to matter. And yet, the clerk at the courthouse will still tell you to try, with the patience of someone whose own bills are being handled through a different arrangement entirely. The form is 2 pages. You fill it out. The form does not ask whether you've already done this and whether the result was a support order sitting in a flour tin. The form only has a front. Meanwhile, the children need shoes. The coal situation from last month has not resolved itself. Your eldest is home again today because someone has to be, and she is 11 and has opinions about this that she keeps mostly to herself, which is the most expensive thing she does for you. You know what the lawyer costs. You know what finding him costs in time you don't have and favours you'll owe. The math runs the same direction every time you do it. You don't do it anymore. You just know the answer. You go to the charity society because your husband is gone and the rent is not, and they take down your account in a careful, practiced hand. They have a word for what happened to you, and the word is desertion, and they write it in a ledger beside a great many other women's names. It is, the caseworker tells you, the single most common reason a family ends up at their door. They call it the poor man's divorce. You notice they already have a form printed for it, ready to go. The form asks for his last known address, his last known employer, the date he left, and whether he left in the night or in the day. There is a box for night and a box for day. Someone has thought about this long enough to make boxes. You check night, because it was night, and because there is something in that box that settles something. Not the situation, but at least the paperwork. The Charity Society gives you what it has, which is mostly paper. They can give you a referral, they can give you another form. They can, if the county's discretionary relief fund isn't already exhausted, which it usually is by November, give you between $3 and $5 once as an emergency disbursement. $3 buys you 2 weeks of milk and bread for 4 children and gets you approximately nowhere on the $8 owed for the room. The caseworker calls this a bridge. You call it a puddle. Meanwhile, somewhere in this city, your husband is living under a different name or the same name in a different neighborhood, which turns out to be nearly as effective as a new identity. The National Desertion Bureau has his photograph on file, a square-jawed man looking slightly to the left of the camera, the way men look in photographs when they already know they're leaving. The photograph ran in the forward last spring. 3 people recognized him. None of them were you. A woman named Dora Hirsch, whose husband departed for Cincinnati with a forwarding address that expired in 6 weeks, sits 2 chairs down from you in the waiting room. She has a hat pin she keeps adjusting even though the hat isn't moving. The caseworker calls her name and she stands up very straight, the way you stand when you're about to be told something politely unhelpful. She is composed, upright, and visibly braced. Dora has been here before. The hat pin knows it. You can sue for abandonment, and the cost of trying is its own lesson. A lawyer costs $50 minimum. Call it 6 weeks of factory wages if you have factory wages, which you don't yet. You can file a complaint yourself in theory. The court will issue a summons. The summons will be delivered to the last known address, which is this apartment, because you are the one still in it. If he can be found and served and brought before a judge, the judge may order support. Support orders are, as Rosa Valente could tell you, mostly decorative. You go through the whole production and end up with a document that is legally binding and practically weightless. Of course, if you can't afford a lawyer, you stay legally married to a man who left in the night. The marriage doesn't dissolve because he stopped participating in it. It just continues, administratively, while you figure out childcare and coal. There is, they say, a faster way out west, for women with the train fare and the months to spare. You have neither. It stays a thing that happens to other people, so you fill out the form, you answer the boxes, night. Last known, the Halsted Street rooming house, but he's not there. They checked. The caseworker stamps it, files it, and tells you to come back in 2 weeks. The ledger closes. Your name is in it now, beside a great many others, all of them waiting for the county's discretionary fund to unexhaust itself before January. You try to put your name to something, a lease or a contract or a simple agreement, and you discover that your signature is not entirely your own. The law in your state still treats a married woman as folded neatly into her husband, which is a tidy arrangement right up until the husband is the very thing you no longer have. You need his name, or his permission, for matters you are now managing entirely alone. The man whose signature the law wants is the man who left. You explain this to a clerk who has heard it before. The legal arrangement is called coverture, and it predates the railroad, the telegraph, and most of the furniture in this building. Under it, you and your husband were one legal person. He was that person. You were the part that cooked. Now he's gone, and the law has not updated its paperwork to reflect this development. The lease for your 2-room apartment on Halsted Street requires a male guarantor. You don't have one. You have 4 children and a very firm handshake, neither of which the landlord accepts as collateral. Count the things that want a signature you can't give. A rental agreement. A bank account opened in your own name. A loan against the life insurance benefit that arrived in a brown envelope 3 weeks after the funeral. A school enrollment form that lists the father's occupation. The forms have not been redesigned for your situation. The forms were designed for a situation where the husband is present and functional, a situation you remember fondly. Mrs. Kowalczyk, the woman 2 floors above you, the one who irons other people's shirts at a nickel apiece, tried to open a savings account last spring. She brought her marriage certificate, her husband's death certificate, and a letter from the parish priest confirming her character. The teller read all 3 documents, set them on the counter, and asked if her husband could come in. He could not come in. This has been established in the documentation. She took her $12 home in her coat pocket and kept it under the mattress, which at least has never asked her about her husband. The bank account is one problem, the loan is a different one. The Metropolitan Life man came to the door every Friday for 11 years, collecting his dime, writing it in his little book, and leaving. When your husband died, the policy paid out $500. $500 is more money than you have seen in one place in your adult life. It is also not enough to live on indefinitely, which you are learning in real time. You'd like to use $200 of it to take over the lease on a small laundry on Blue Island Avenue, the owner being elderly and willing to sell the equipment for installments. The bank will lend against the policy, but the loan requires your husband's co-signature. You explain the situation again. The loan officer makes a note. The note says, "Nothing. Actionable." The loan officer slides the application back across the desk and taps one empty line with his pen, the line for the co-signature. He has done this before. The tap is practiced, weary, and faintly bored. You can't sign the lease alone. You can't get the loan alone. You can't open the business that would let you stop taking in other people's washing at rates that leave your hands cracked by Tuesday. He points at the line again, as if you'd missed it, as if the trouble were your eyesight and not a man who is either dead or 3 states away. To his pen there is no difference between the two, and no difference between either of those and a woman who simply hasn't tried hard enough. Of course, you could sue. You can file a civil action, hire counsel at rates beginning around $50, serve papers to an address that may or may not still be his, and wait for a court date. A mother in the tenement across the alley did exactly this. She located her husband in Pittsburgh, won a support order, and has received nothing. The order exists. It has a seal on it. It sits in her bureau drawer beneath her children's baptismal records, doing the same amount of financial work as the baptismal records. You fold the lease back into its envelope. You'll ask your landlady, Mrs. Benedetti, if she'll take your word instead of a guarantor. She probably will. She has done it before. She keeps a mental ledger of every woman in this building and what they're owed, and it runs considerably longer than anything the county has on file. You pay on time. She knows you pay on time. That is the entire contract, conducted in the hallway, with no signatures required from anyone. You consider a divorce the way you'd consider a long journey you cannot afford, which is to say carefully, and then not at all. The law requires grounds, adultery or cruelty or desertion or drink, and proof of them, and a lawyer to present the proof, and the lawyer alone costs upward of $50. $50 is several weeks of wages you do not have to spare, so the marriage stays legally intact long after it has stopped being a marriage in any other sense. On paper, you remain a wife. The law recognizes exactly 4 valid grounds: adultery, cruelty, desertion, and drink, and each one is a problem before the money even enters the room. Cruelty requires witnesses. Adultery requires evidence that a judge will accept, which is different from evidence you personally watched happen. Desertion requires that he has been gone a specific length of time, which varies by state, which means you are also waiting on a calendar while you are waiting on a lawyer while you are waiting on money you don't have. The process has the same energy as a line that gains a person ahead of you every time you reach the front. There is, you've heard, a faster way out somewhere west, where the residency rules are loose and the questions few. It is a real door, and it opens for one specific woman, the one who can stop earning for the better part of a year and pay to sit in a far-off boarding house while a calendar turns in her favor. You cannot stop earning for a week, so the fast way out stays a story other women tell, clean, quick, and entirely out of reach, and you go back to pricing the slow way, which is the only way priced for you. A woman on Halsted Street named Dora Weiss files for divorce in Cook County in 1923. She has grounds, her husband drank, then left, which covers 2 entries on the approved list. She borrows the lawyer's retainer from her sister-in-law and waits 11 months for a court date. The judge grants the divorce. He also grants her a support order. Her husband is in Cincinnati. The support order does not follow him to Cincinnati. Dora folds the paper into her coat pocket and takes the streetcar home. The paper does not buy coal. Of course, the alternative is to stay married to a man who is somewhere else, which has its own costs. You cannot remarry. You cannot claim widowhood for any sympathy or any pension eligibility that requires it. If he surfaces and makes legal claims on the children, on property, on you, he can make them, because the marriage is still intact, and intact is the operative word. The law treats your marriage as a living structure. You are the only one maintaining it. The divorce rate climbed anyway. By 1920, it's roughly 1 in 7 marriages, up from 1 in 1740 years earlier. The numbers suggest women are finding ways. They are. They're borrowing from sisters-in-law like Dora. They're waiting the residency period in a state that isn't Nevada but offers slightly faster grounds. They're filing without lawyers, which courts permit and do not recommend. And the paperwork comes back wrong twice. And the third time it goes through and costs only filing fees, which are still $3 you counted twice before spending. What you're left with, if the divorce goes through, is a legal status that makes you a divorcee, which in 1923 is a word people say with a small pause before and after it. Your landlady uses that pause. The woman at the dry goods counter uses it. The word means free, technically, and also means suspect, which is a combination the decade applies to women with some consistency. The other option, the one nobody calls by its formal name, is to stay where you are, married on paper to an absent man, unable to remarry, unable to collect a widow's pension, unable to fully enforce a support order that follows him nowhere. The marriage is a piece of paper in a county record. It has no other presence in your house. But it is there. It has always been there. It doesn't cost $50. You hear about Nevada the way you hear about any door that only opens for other people. A woman can go out there, establish residency in 6 months, and walk back out divorced, clean and quick, where your own state would demand years and grounds and a fight. The catch is the 6 months. 6 months of travel, of rent in a strange city, of not earning a cent while you wait out the calendar. It is a solution priced exactly for the women who need it least. You file it under things that exist but not for you. Round-trip rail from Chicago to Reno runs about $40 in 1923. A boarding house room in Reno, understanding exactly why you're there and pricing accordingly, runs $8 to $12 a week. 6 months is 26 weeks. You do the math. Or you don't, because you don't need to. You already know it ends with a number you don't have. The whole arrangement is less a legal mechanism than a resort vacation with paperwork at the end. Elsewhere in the country, divorce requires grounds. Abandonment, cruelty, adultery. Each one sounds simple until you're the one who has to prove it to a judge in a county where the judge went to school with your husband's cousin. The cruelty has to be documented. The abandonment has a waiting period. The adultery needs a witness, which is its own problem. Mildred Carr, who has lived without a husband in her house for 3 years, is told she must wait 2 more before the desertion qualifies. She takes the news the way she takes everything now, quiet, level, and unsurprised. The calendar has opinions, strong ones. The clerk at the Cook County counter quotes you the filing fee without looking up, $2. $2 you could almost find. Then he mentions the way clerks mention the part that matters, that you'll want a lawyer who files correctly, who knows which clerk to talk to, who doesn't accidentally sink your case on a technicality, and that's $50 minimum. He says it and goes back to his stamp. $50 is 6 weeks at the laundry. The laundry does not pause for court dates. You could represent yourself. You could walk into a courtroom with your own documents and your own argument and stand in front of a judge who has never once seen that happen without it going badly. The form lists the grounds in order. Adultery is number 1. Cruelty is number 3. Incompatibility is not on the form. Incompatibility is not a grounds. The form was written by someone whose incompatibility had its own guest bedroom and never had to share a wall with it, and so most women don't divorce. They separate, informally, the way furniture gets rearranged, quietly, without announcement, with the understanding that the legal structure remains intact even after everything inside it has collapsed. You are still his wife. You can't sign a lease alone in several states, not without his signature, not without producing a man who is no longer producing himself for your convenience. The law keeps a record of the marriage long after the marriage has left the building. What you do instead is manage. You find a room. You find work. You find a neighbor who will watch the children for a quarter or a favor to be named later. You don't call yourself divorced because you aren't. You don't call yourself a widow because he isn't dead, probably. You're a woman with children and an address and a number of problems that are all, technically, still legally attached to one man's name somewhere east of here. The situation doesn't have a clean word for it in 1923. Social workers call it desertion. You call it Tuesday. You pay the insurance man 5 cents a week because he comes to the door to collect it, and 5 cents is a sum you can almost always find somewhere. He carries a little book and marks your payment in it, and the policy itself is small, a burial policy really, a hedge against the one expense you cannot possibly improvise. Companies like Metropolitan Life built an empire out of these nickels, millions of them, gathered door to door across the working neighborhoods. You keep the book somewhere safe. The book is the closest thing you own to a promise. His name is Mr. Dabrowski, and he comes every Thursday between 4 and 5, rain or coal smoke or both. He wears the same brown coat every week and knocks with 2 knuckles, not a fist, which is how you know it isn't the landlord. He opens the collection book to your page with the practiced efficiency of a man who has 17 other pages to get to before dark. You hand him the nickel. He marks it. He says good evening. The transaction takes 30 seconds and represents your entire financial planning infrastructure. The policy itself is small, plain, and dependable. A burial policy from Metropolitan Life or Prudential in 1922 pays out somewhere between $500 and $1,000, enough to bury a person decently, and if you're widowed, young enough, to do something slightly larger with the remainder. Some women use it to open a small laundry, some use it to cover 6 months of rent while they find their footing, a few buy sewing machines and take in piecework. $500 is not a fortune. In 2024 terms, it's roughly $7,500, which is also not a fortune, but it's the difference between a door and a wall. The premium collection system is basically a subscription service, except the only one who gets to cancel is the one who dies. Mr. Dabrowski's company collects these nickels and dimes across thousands of apartments and boarding house rooms, from women whose names they spell wrong in the ledger and whose ages they round to the nearest decade. The actuarial tables are precise. The spelling is approximate. The policy has conditions. It has approximately 7 conditions, and you will satisfy 6 of them. One of them involves a contestability period during which the company may determine that the deceased misrepresented her age, her health, her occupation, or some combination of the 3. Another involves the definition of accidental death versus illness, a distinction that becomes extremely interesting after tuberculosis has been moving through a building for 2 years. The fine print is long. Mr. Dabrowski doesn't carry copies of it. He carries the collection book, and yet women pay. Every Thursday. Because the alternative is the one expense that actually cannot be managed through resourcefulness or rationing or asking the landlady for one more week. You can cut cardboard to fit a shoe with a hole in it. You can boil the bones twice. You can send your 11-year-old to mind the younger 3 for another day. But the cost of burying someone, the box, the plot, the man who digs it, that one doesn't yield to improvisation. 2. The nickel on Thursday is not optimism. It's math. Some women carry policies on the children too. A 10-cent policy on a child pays a smaller sum, enough for a small box and a small plot, which is a sentence that carries its own weight and doesn't need elaboration. Infant mortality in unventilated tenements spikes every July and August with a reliability that the insurance company has also noticed and priced accordingly. The summer heat is not a surprise to anyone keeping records. The payout, when it comes, arrives as a lump, a physical object, a check, a thing that exists outside the weekly arithmetic of 14-cent quarts of milk and $8 rent. For a woman who collects, it's the only moment in the financial life of a poor household when money arrives in a quantity larger than the immediate crisis it's needed for. Some women have never held that much at once. A few manage it wisely. Some have it taken from them before the week is out, by men who had already left and materialized again at the smell of paper money. The collection book survives all of this. It doesn't have opinions about any of it. It just marks your page. You come into a sum of money exactly once, and it arrives in the worst possible way. Your husband is dead, the burial policy pays out, and suddenly you are holding $500 you would give anything not to have earned. It is enough to bury him and still have something left over. With what remains, some women open a small laundry, or a shop, or take a lease on a house and rent out the rooms. The money is a door. You stand in front of it counting, because a door like this only opens the once. $500 is not wealth. It is approximately 10 months of your current earnings, assuming you have current earnings, which is not a safe assumption. It is a number that looks large until you divide it by what things cost, at which point it begins looking considerably more like a deadline than a windfall. You hold it in your hands. Some of it is literal cash. Some of it is a check you'll need a man at the bank to countersign. Because that's still how banks feel about women in 1922, and you count it the way you count everything. Carefully. With the door locked, some women use it to stay still. 6 months of rent, food, coal and shoes for the children buys you time to figure out what comes next, without also working 54 hours a week in a room that smells like bleach. That's the conservative play, Miss Us. Kaminska on the second floor took that route after her husband died of the flu in 1919, stretched the money across 8 months, and when it ran out she had her bearings well enough to take in 2 boarders and keep the rooms. She keeps a ledger on the kitchen table. It is thick with small, neat numbers, and she never seems to close it entirely. Other women open something. A laundry is the most common. You already know how to do it. The equipment is the main expense, and the neighborhood always needs one. A candy counter. A room that becomes a dressmaker's shop by morning and a dining room by evening. The logic is sound. Better to own the machine than to feed it with your hours. The $500 buys you that chance. Barely. If nothing goes wrong in the first 3 months, and you haven't needed a lawyer for anything, a bank loan requires a co-signer. In most states, a woman can't sign a commercial lease independently. The law considers her signature provisional, which is a polite way of saying it considers her provisional. You need a brother, a father, a grown son, a neighbor willing to put his name on paper. If you have one, the door opens. If you don't, you go back to the other options, the ones that involve standing in a room at 100 degrees surrounded by other people's shirts. The money can also disappear without drama. A child gets sick in July, it's always July, in the tenements, when the heat stops moving and the milk turns and the infants run fevers that don't break. A week at the hospital, or a week of the doctor coming to the house, and $200 is gone, quietly. The way water goes through cardboard. You don't argue with it. You adjust the arithmetic and keep going. For the women who do open something, who get the co-signer, who survive the first winter, who learn which suppliers will extend credit and which ones won't, the $500 becomes, over time, a kind of floor. Not comfort, not safety. A floor, the lowest point you fell to, the thing you built back up from. You don't talk about it much. There isn't a language for it that doesn't sound either like bragging or like grief. Both of those are private. The ledger stays on the table. The door stays open. You go to the settlement house for the things it gives away that aren't food. A class in stretching $1, a room where someone patiently explains the city's paperwork, an English lesson if your tongue is still learning the place. The women who run it are earnest and organized, and they hand you knowledge as though knowledge were the one missing ingredient. Some of it genuinely helps. You learn which market is cheaper on which day, which form unlocks which office. You take everything offered. You sort out later what was actually useful. The day nursery holds about 25 children, which is the number 25 against a neighborhood that needs several hundred. Your name goes on a list. The list does not move quickly. It is, in its way, a lifeboat with a wait list, and the lifeboat is already full of somebody else's children, a woman named Mrs. Reardon runs the intake desk on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She wears the same grey cardigan every session and writes your name into the ledger with the unhurried calm of a person who has explained the weight to 10,000 mothers and expects to explain it to 10,000 more. She doesn't look up when she says approximately 7 weeks, which is the same number she gave you last time. She says it the way a doctor says a number, flat, level, and reliably unsurprised. Meanwhile, the class on home economics is genuinely something. You learn that bones go into the pot twice, the second time being the important time, when the marrow finally concedes. You learn that a quart of milk at 14 cents, bought Tuesday, can be stretched against a pot of oatmeal 3 mornings running if you're doing the arithmetic right. You write this down on the back of the form you were given in the other room. The English class is on Wednesdays. Your neighbour Ruja, who has been here 2 years longer than you, says it helps most with the landlord and least with the foreman, because the foreman doesn't actually need to understand you. He needs you to lift things. You go anyway. The teacher is patient. The sentences she teaches you are practical. Where is the office? I am looking for my child. I do not understand this paper. The women behind the desks know the city's rules in the abstract. They know the pension form exists. They know the county office opens at 9. What they can't tell you is that the county office's pension funds ran out in October, that reapplying in January means the same conversation in January, that knowing the correct form to file is not the same thing as having the form do anything. They're handing you a map. The roads on the map are accurate. The bridge is still out. You take the map. You'd be foolish not to. You take the canning class and the nutrition lecture and the pamphlet about tuberculosis, ventilation, which you fold into your coat pocket, alongside the forms you haven't been able to file yet, and the list of markets ranked by Tuesday prices. Your coat pocket has become its own small archive of things you're working on. The settlement house reformers, the ones who write the reports, testify before committees, argue for the pension laws, are doing genuine work. Grace Abbott and Florence Kelly have been fighting for years to get these laws funded, to close the suitable home loophole that keeps black mothers out, to make the pensions actual money instead of principled gestures. That fight is slow. It won't resolve this decade. You are not in a position to wait for a decade. So you take the Wednesday English class. You learn about the Tuesday market. You put your name on the day nursery list and check it again in 6 weeks. Mrs. Reardon writes your follow-up in the ledger without looking up. The cardigan is the same one. The list has not shortened perceptibly. You thank her anyway, because she is the only person this week who wrote your name down at all. You open the door to the visiting nurse because the baby has been coughing, and the nurse comes free, which makes her the only medical opinion you can afford. She is brisk and kind and carries a black bag, and she looks at the baby and the room and you, in roughly that order. She leaves instructions written on a card. Air, milk, rest, every one of them, a thing that costs either money you don't have or time you can't take. You thank her, and you mean it. You will manage the half of the list that happens to be free. A quart of milk costs 14 cents. That is not, on its own, an impossible number. But it sits beside the bread, which is 10 cents, and the coal, which ran out before the cold did, and the children's shoes, which have been lined with cardboard cut to the shape of the hole since November. 14 cents isn't the problem. 14 cents added to everything else is the problem. You do the arithmetic the way you always do it, standing up, at the table, with a pencil you've sharpened down to almost nothing. The baby coughs again from the other room. Your eldest, Clara, is 11. She is in there now, not at school, because the 2 smaller ones need minding, and you need to be at the laundry by 6. Clara does this without complaint, which is either a good sign or a sign that she has stopped expecting things to be otherwise. You have not yet decided which. The nurse will come back in a week if you leave a note at the district office. This is useful. The district office is 4 blocks away, which is manageable. The note costs a stamp, which costs 2 cents, which you subtract from the bread column and do not write down. The visiting nurse program runs on charity and a federal appropriation that gets argued about every session and occasionally doesn't come through, which means the nurse herself is on a schedule slightly more reliable than the pension but less reliable than the milk. The card she left is still on the table. Rest is printed in a clean, confident hand, as if the word rests comfortably anywhere it's placed. You've turned it over twice. There is nothing on the back. 2 rooms for you and 4 children means the baby sleeps in the same air that cooked dinner and dried the wet wool and absorbed everything the winter pushed under the door. Air, the card says. The window opens 4 inches before the frame swells and refuses. The window has opinions about this. They are not your opinions. You open it anyway and stand there a moment in the cold, which is free, and breathe it in on the baby's behalf. Mrs. Kowalczyk from the floor above comes down in the afternoon to check on the cough. She brings a piece of cloth wrung out in something that smells like camphor and lays it on the baby's chest with the slow, certain, and unhurried seriousness of a woman who has done this before, which she has. 4 times. With her own. She doesn't stay long. She has her own arithmetic to do before her husband gets home. By evening, the baby is quieter. Whether this is the camphor or the cold air through the 4-inch window or just the ordinary passage of hours, you don't know. You won't know. The nurse's card doesn't explain that part. It assumes the instructions produce the outcome, which is the kind of assumption you stopped making some time ago. You put the card in the drawer where you keep the important papers, the lease, the insurance book, the letter from the county about the pension. The letter says approved in principle. It is said that since September, approved in principle means the county has no money, which is different from not qualifying, and also exactly the same as not qualifying. The pension, if it ever arrives, is $15 a month. The rent is $11. You have run this number so many times it has worn a groove. You check the baby one more time. Still breathing. Still warm. Clara has fallen asleep in the chair with the smallest one across her lap, both of them tipped sideways at the same angle, like a pair of parentheses around a sentence nobody finished writing. You blow out the candle. The dark costs nothing. You decide each Sunday whether you can afford to be seen, which is a strange thing to have to weigh about a church. The pew itself is free. The being looked at is not. You are a woman without a husband sitting where the wives sit, and the arithmetic of how that came to be is on display whether you explain it or not. Some weeks you go anyway because the children should, and you sit straight and let the glances pass over you. Some weeks you stay home and call it rest. Either way, you've done the sum first. The coat is the first calculation. Yours is 3 winters old and shows it in the elbows. The children's are newer, meaning less old, meaning last winters with the buttons replaced and the hems let down as far as the fabric allows. Mrs. Dombrowski 2 floors up still has her husband and her coat from Marshall Fields, and she doesn't say anything about yours. She doesn't have to. The coat says it for her. Clothes are a ledger you carry on your body. A dress costs between $1.50 and $4 new, which is not something you buy new. The church rummage sales happen twice a year and you are there when the doors open, not because you enjoy it, but because the women who arrive second get the thin pile. You know which colours to avoid, the dull, faded and unlucky ones that show the mending or look like someone else's grief. You become, over time, very specific about buttons. The children understand more than you've told them. Your eldest, the boy, is 9 and has already learned a particular stillness in public. The posture of a child who has been coached, not roughly, just clearly, about how much of the house to let outside the house. He straightens when you straighten. He doesn't ask for things in front of other people. This was not a lesson you taught directly. It was one he arrived at, which is worse. Sunday also means dinner, and dinner on Sunday is the one meal with a shape to it. You've been saving since Tuesday, not money exactly, but economy. The bread that didn't go stale, the beans soaked overnight, a bit of salt pork bought at the end of the week when the butcher marks it down because it won't keep. The pot holds everything. You've boiled those bones twice already and the stock is thin, but it's warm and it's there. The children eat first. You eat what's left, which is enough, or close enough that you don't mention it. Mrs. Pietrowski from the building next door comes by sometimes after the service if you went. She brings her youngest on her hip and she doesn't ask about the pension, and you don't offer, because there's a kind of agreement between women in this building about which subjects stay closed. She sits at your table and you make coffee stretched with chicory, and for 20 minutes the room is just a room with 2 women in it, not a problem to be assessed. The chicory doesn't taste like coffee. You've stopped noticing. The children go to bed and you sit near the window with the mending, because the kerosene lamp costs money to run and daylight at least is still free. Your hands know the needle without looking. You've been doing this since the weeks right after, when the house felt like it had too many rooms in the wrong arrangement, when every still evening announced itself. The mending keeps your hands busy, which keeps the evenings from being a question you have to answer. Next Sunday you'll do the sum again, the coat, the being looked at, whether the children's shoes will last another week without the cardboard showing at the heel. You'll decide, and you'll go, or you won't, and either way, Monday will arrive exactly the same. You keep the room ready for inspection at all times, because the people who decide whether you're a fit mother may arrive without any warning. A caseworker can appear at the door, look slowly around, and form an opinion, and the opinion goes into a file, and the file decides whether help reaches you or doesn't. So, the dishes are clean. The children are clean. You are clean. The word they use is suitable, and the word has no fixed meaning, which means it can mean whatever the particular person standing at your door decides it means today. Suitable has approximately 11 possible meanings, and exactly none of them are printed anywhere you could point to. The pension itself is $15 a month for a mother with 2 children in Cook County, Illinois. A 2-room apartment runs 8 to 14. You've done that arithmetic. Everyone has done that arithmetic. The $15 is not the joke. The joke is that fewer than 3% of widows with children ever receive it, which makes it less a safety net than a rumor with a county seal on it. Mrs. Kowalczyk on the 3rd floor was approved in principle last February. That phrase, in principle, did a tremendous amount of work. It meant the county agreed she existed and was poor and had children and was a widow and met every written criterion. It also meant the county's appropriation for the year was exhausted, and she should reapply in January, which is basically a library that issues you a card and then mentions the building burned down in 1919. She reapplied. She is still reapplying. The dishes remain clean. The word appears on the intake form as a category, not a definition. A suitable home is clean, morally sound, free of undesirable influences, and consistent with proper child rearing. A caseworker named Miss Dempsey carries a clipboard and writes in a small, neat hand. She looks at the curtains. She looks at whether you have a curtain. She looks at the children's shoes, which you've stuffed with cardboard cut to the shape of the holes in them, and she writes something, and you don't know if the cardboard is evidence of poverty or evidence of resourcefulness, and the file doesn't distinguish. For black mothers on the south side, the word suitable does something else entirely. It finds additional meanings. It notices the neighborhood. It notices the building. It notices that you pay 20% more than the woman 2 miles west pays for a room half this size, and it does not note that fact in your favor. It notes the quality of the room you're in. You are examined. Your landlord is not. The form has no second page. The women who built the pension system, Julia Lathrop, Florence Kelly, Lillian Wald, argued for years that poverty itself should not be evidence of unsuitability. They were right. The counties listened politely and administered the funds anyway, which is a very specific kind of listening. The pension was meant to keep children out of orphanages by keeping their mothers solvent. That was the idea. The idea ran directly into a county treasurer with a ledger and a discretionary clause, and the discretionary clause won every time. So you keep the room ready. The dishes are washed and set out clean, upright, and squared to the shelf, in case a clipboard wants to see them. You tell your son that company may come and he should sit nicely and not mention that you've been burning the chair leg. He sits on the edge of the bed with his hands folded in his lap and does not move. He does not mention the chair. He is 9, and he holds himself still and quiet and careful for the better part of an hour, owed entirely to a woman with neat handwriting who will be gone by noon. You work in another woman's house from before her family wakes until after they sleep, and at the end of the week you are paid $2, sometimes $3, and sometimes a parcel of leftover food instead of coins. The work is the cooking and the washing and the minding of children who aren't yours, while your own children are minded by someone even poorer than you are. There is no contract, no set wage, no office to bring a complaint to. The terms are whatever the household decides on the day. You are expected to be grateful for the parcel. The parcel is not a parcel. It's a heel of bread, a tin of sardines that didn't open cleanly, and half a jar of stewed tomatoes with the lid put back on sideways. The household presents this to you with the same expression a museum guard uses when you take too long at a painting. You carry it home on the streetcar wrapped in yesterday's newspaper because that's what you have for wrapping things. Southern black women doing this same work sometimes earn $2, sometimes less. Sometimes the wage is settled as room and board in the employer's house, which solves one problem and introduces several others, the main one being that there is no room in the employer's house for the children you left in Atlanta or Birmingham or Shreveport with your mother or your sister or whoever could be persuaded. You are now housed and fed and childless by the same transaction. The Great Migration moved 100,000 people north. Some of them left their children temporarily. Temporarily is doing a lot of work in that sentence. A woman named Dora takes a live-out position on the north side, which means she commutes 90 minutes each direction, which means she is gone before her youngest wakes and back after all 3 are asleep. Her neighbour Missus Lindholm, who has her own 4 to manage, watches Dora's children for 30 cents a week and 2 meals shared on Sundays. This is the childcare system. A woman with slightly more children watches the children of the woman with slightly fewer. Nobody is paid enough. Nobody is licensed. The system functions because it has to. The wage, when it arrives as coins, is counted carefully. A quart of milk at 14 cents. Bread at 10. Beans purchased in the largest available quantity because beans do not have a bad week the way other food does. The bones go into the pot twice, just to be sure. A soup from bones that have already made one soup is still soup, thin, pale, and stubbornly warm. It is optimistic soup. It is soup that believes in itself more than it probably should. Now, the shoes. Children's shoes cost between $1.50 and $3 and wear through in 4 months, which is the kind of mathematics that has no solution. What you do instead is cut cardboard to the shape of the sole and insert it, And this works until it rains. It rains. You cut new cardboard. There are charitable shoe distributions in winter, run by settlement houses and church auxiliaries, and you arrive early because the sizes go fast and your youngest is a 7, and 7s always go first. He walks home in shoes that are a size too large, which is acceptable. Large is better than nothing. Large you can stuff with newspaper. The federal government knows about the 43 cents. It's in the labor reports. The figure is published, noted, cited in reform testimony, and then placed in a drawer. Women earn 43 cents for every dollar a man earns, a number that has the confidence of a settled matter and the practical force of a suggestion. Missus. Eleanor Booker, a domestic on Chicago's South Side, keeps her pay in a tin behind the loose brick near the stove. Not because she doesn't trust banks, because the nearest bank that will open an account for a woman without a male guarantor is 4 miles away and closes at 3. She is never home by 3. The tin has a dent in it from the time someone dropped it. Not a theft, just an accident, but she keeps it dented because the dent means she knows if it's been touched. She checks it every morning before she leaves. It has not been touched. She leaves. You arrive in the northern city with a single bag, the children, and an address written on a scrap of paper, and the address turns out to be one of the few neighborhoods that will rent to you at all. The trains carried hundreds of thousands north on the very same hope, and the hope was real, and it was also quietly rationed. You may live here, on the south side, in Harlem, in the handful of blocks the city has decided are yours. The rent is higher than the white blocks charge for better rooms. You take the room anyway. The landlord is aware of the arrangement. You are aware the landlord is aware. The room is small, dark, and stubbornly cold, and it costs more than its walls suggest. Cracked plaster, a window that faces another wall, a radiator that knocks like it has opinions. You pay 15 to 25% more than the woman 2 streets over pays for a room that gets afternoon light. The city doesn't post a sign explaining this. It doesn't have to. The address on the paper already said it. 3 families share the hallway. In July, the hallway is hotter than the laundry room you left at 6 in the morning. In January, the hallway is the warmest part of the floor because someone left their oven door open downstairs and the heat rises through gaps the building has developed over decades of being crowded beyond what the building agreed to. The tuberculosis moves through buildings like this the same way, which is quickly and without announcement. 100,000 Americans died of it in 1927 alone. The disease has a preference for unventilated rooms and borrowed blankets. It isn't picky beyond that. Mrs. Delphine Carter lives on the floor above you. She arrived from Alabama 14 months ago and she irons for a white family on the north side 6 days a week, and she watches your youngest on Tuesday and Thursday in exchange for you watching her too on Monday and Wednesday. The arrangement has never been written down. Delphine transfers your daughter from her hip to yours in the hallway with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has made this particular handoff 100 times. She doesn't say goodbye. She's already late. The South Side has a church on nearly every block, a policy club on most of the others, and a shortage of grocery stores that don't charge more than they're worth. You buy bread for 10 cents, milk for 14 cents a quart. You count the 14 cents against the rest of the week before you hand it over. There's a butcher on Wabash who will sell you bones for almost nothing if you come near closing, and you come near closing. The bones go into the pot twice, because the first time there's still something in them, and the second time there isn't, but you check. A neighbor told you about the bones. She learned it from a neighbor. The information travels the same way the tuberculosis does, just with better outcomes. The city's housing authority has maps. The maps have lines on them. The lines separate where you are permitted to rent from where you are not permitted to rent, and the lines are drawn with the confidence of someone who has never had to find a room in 3 days with 2 children and a week's wages. The lines aren't law, exactly. They don't need to be law. The landlords on the other side of the lines simply don't answer the door, or they answer and say the room is taken, and the room is never taken in a way you could prove. You don't have time to prove it. You have a Tuesday shift. The neighborhood is not what you imagined, and it is also not nothing. There's a woman on your block who runs a small press shop out of her front room. There's a reading room at the Wabash YMCA. The church 3 doors down runs a Saturday school for children who are falling behind, which is most children here, because the public schools in this district are older and more crowded than the ones 4 miles north, and the gap between the two is politely not discussed. Your son attends both, the Saturday school and the regular school, and he is tired on Saturday afternoons in a way that looks a great deal like ambition. You let him sleep. You pay more for less because the map has already decided where you're allowed to sleep. The room is smaller, the building older, the plumbing more theoretical than actual, and the rent runs 15 to 25 cents on the dollar, above what the next neighborhood over pays for something better. The landlord knows perfectly well you cannot simply move. The same covenants that keep you here keep your choices short, and short choices are expensive choices. You hand over the rent. The arithmetic is not subtle, and no one in the transaction pretends otherwise. The building has 12 units and one working toilet per floor. The radiator works on a schedule nobody has successfully decoded, which means it either doesn't run at all or runs at full force at 3 in the morning, clanging against its pipes like a man who has just remembered something urgent. The window faces a wall so close it could rent itself out as a mirror. The wall faces another wall. There's a window somewhere in the building that faces actual sky, but you haven't found it, and you've been here 8 months. A ton of coal runs $10 to $14 in 1922, which is not nothing. It is, in fact, a significant fraction of everything you have. You buy it in smaller amounts because you can't afford a ton at once, which means you pay a higher per unit price, which means you run out faster, which is a loop the coal company finds very satisfying. When the coal runs out in February, and it runs out in February, you burn what's available. The chair with the wobbly leg goes first. Then the crate, the dishes came in. Then the second crate, which you were saving. Across the hall, Mrs. Kowalczyk is burning the same crate for the same reasons, and has been doing this every winter since 1918, when her husband didn't come back from the Meuse Argonne and the coal didn't get cheaper. Mrs. Kowalczyk keeps a sharp folding knife on her windowsill, not for protection but for cardboard. She cuts it to the exact shape of a child's shoe sole, smoothed flat, fitted in. Her youngest has gone through 2 pairs this winter. The cardboard lasts about a week before it compresses and splits, and you cut a new piece and start again. Children's shoes run $1.50 to $3 a pair, which is approximately the cost of a week's groceries, so you choose shoes or groceries, and then you cut more cardboard and choose groceries. Charitable shoe distributions happen in winter at the settlement house, and you plan around them the way some people plan around sales at Marshall Field's, except Marshall Field's doesn't run out and send you home with nothing. The food budget for a mother and 2 children runs $12 to $18 a month. Bread is 10 cents a loaf, milk is 14 cents a quart, counted against everything else before you pick it up. Beans, potatoes, salt pork, these form the structural pillars of a diet that is technically complete in the sense that it keeps you vertical. The bones go into the pot twice, just to be sure, then the vegetable peelings go in after, and what comes out is a soup that the children accept without complaint because they've never had a comparison point. It isn't bad soup, it simply knows what it is. The heat in July and August is its own economy of disaster. The tenement holds heat the way a cast iron pan holds heat. Long after the source is gone, the walls radiate it back at you through the night. Infants in unventilated rooms spike fevers that turn quickly. The newspapers track it, the settlement nurses track it, and every summer the numbers climb on schedule like a bill with a known due date. You keep the infant as still as possible in the coolest corner, which is not especially cool. You wet a cloth. You wait. Mrs. Kowalczyk coughs through the wall at night now, a harsh, deep and persistent cough that has been getting worse since November. Tuberculosis moves easily through a building this crowded. Roughly 100,000 Americans died of it as late as 1927, and it doesn't ask which floor you're on. The extra cents on the dollar you hand the landlord every week buy you thinner walls, closer neighbors, and a window that faces a wall, which is to say the rent premium is also a health premium, paid in advance. By you. You didn't choose the address. It was chosen for you by covenants signed before you arrived in this city, by men who never met you and charged you for the privilege anyway. You sit down to write a letter because you do not know what else there is to do, and the newspaper prints letters like yours, and reading them is the only proof you have that other women are drowning quietly alongside you. Your husband came ahead to earn the passage, and you followed with the children, and the man who was supposed to meet the boat was not the man you remembered, or was no longer any man at all. You speak little of the language. The courts speak none of yours. So you write to the one address that answers in your own words. The column is called a Bintel Brief, a bundle of letters. It runs in the Yiddish language forward, and its editors have seen every version of your situation. The husband who sent money for 3 months and then stopped. The husband who found someone else and kept it businesslike about it. The husband who simply did not come home one Tuesday and was not seen again in that city. The editor's answer in print. The community reads, "You are not alone in the way you were alone yesterday." The National Desertion Bureau keeps files, hundreds of them, thousands of them. By 1925, they claim more than 10,000 resolved cases, which sounds like a lot until you consider how they defined resolved. A resolved case is one where they found the man. What happened after finding him is a different column entirely. Some men are brought back, which helps briefly. Some men are published. Their photographs appear in the newspaper beside their names and their last known addresses, which is basically LinkedIn, except the only thing the profile confirms is that he left. Miss us. Bernstein, on the 4th floor, the one with the twins, tells you the bureau wrote to her husband's brother in Philadelphia. The brother wrote back. The letter said he hadn't seen him. The bureau noted this in the file. The file continues to exist. It does not buy bread. Desertion is the poor man's divorce. That's what the social workers in New York call it by 1920, flatly, in reports, like it's a recognized category of weather. A divorce costs $50 in lawyers' fees, several weeks of wages, assuming you have weeks and wages, and requires a husband present enough to be served papers. Desertion requires nothing except a husband who decides not to come home. The legal gap between these two situations is not in your favor. You cannot remarry. You cannot, in several states, sign a contract in your own name because the law still considers you attached to a man who has relocated to Cincinnati and is not replying to correspondence. So you write. You describe the children's ages. You describe the last thing he said, which was ordinary, which is somehow the worst part. You describe the landlord, who has been patient but not infinitely so. You describe your English, which is improving but is not yet the kind you can use in a courthouse. Rivka Feldman, who types at the garment factory on Hester Street, reads your letter in the waiting room on a Tuesday and quietly folds it into her coat pocket, not to steal it, but because it says the thing she hasn't been able to say, and she plans to read it again when she gets home. The letter gets printed. You get a response. It is warm, kind, and useless about the rent, 3 paragraphs long and gentle in every line, and it does not solve a thing. But somewhere in the Bronx, a woman reads it and recognizes her own address, not the street address, the other one, the one you only know by its smell, which is strong coffee and damp wool and a door that locks but doesn't close all the way. She didn't write her own letter, but now she might. You listen to the coughing through the wall and you count, because in a house this crowded, a cough is information. 4 or 5 people share rooms that were meant for 2, and the air moves between them freely, and so does whatever it is they're carrying. Tuberculosis is the word nobody in the building says out loud, though everyone alive in it knows the sound. You keep the children close and the window cracked open, and hope is not a plan, but it is what's on offer. You learn which cough is a cold and which one quietly empties a room. A boarding house room in Chicago or New York runs $3 to $6 a week, and a meal plan adds another $3 to $5 on top of that. You are paying, in other words, for the privilege of a shared wall and a shared staircase and the particular way everyone else's soup smells at 6 o'clock. The building knows everyone's business. The floorboards announce you before you knock. The radiator is ancient, loud, and faintly resentful, and it makes a sound like a man who has already given up. Tuberculosis killed roughly 100,000 Americans a year, as late as 1927. It did not care about the meal plan. It moved through overcrowded rooms with the quiet efficiency of something that has been doing this longer than buildings have existed. You crack the window because someone told you fresh air helps, and you keep cracking it even in February, pulling the children close under a shared coat that smells like everyone who has worn it before you. Ventilation is the medical advice. Ventilation is free. Almost everything else is not. The coal is its own arithmetic. A ton cost $10 to $14 in 1922, which is approximately 1 month's wages for a laundry worker and approximately 4 months of a county pension in Cook County, assuming you're one of the fewer than 3% of widows who actually receive one. The coal does not offer a payment plan. The coal has never, in its long history, offered anyone a payment plan. The coal runs out before the cold does. This is not a metaphor. It is a sequence of events that happens in January and then again in February. When the coal is gone, you burn furniture. When the furniture is gone, you walk the perimeter of nearby construction sites with an empty flour sack and collect whatever the workers left behind. Miss us. Danuta Sobchak on the third floor does this every Tuesday morning. She has a particular route. She is faster than she looks. The construction sites have not been told they are provisioning the building, and nobody sees a pressing reason to inform them. The children's shoes wear through in months. A new pair costs $1.50 to $3, which is a week's worth of milk and bread for the whole family weighed against keeping small feet off bare Chicago pavement in November. You cut cardboard to the shape of the hole and slide it inside the sole, which solves the problem until it rains. Charitable shoe distributions happen in winter through settlement houses and church basements, and you learn which line forms earliest and you stand in it. The children don't ask why. They are 7 and 9 and they already know. Food for 3 people runs $12 to $18 a month. Bread is 10 cents a loaf, milk is 14 cents a quart, counted against everything else every single time you pick it up. Beans and potatoes and salt pork carry the rest. The bones go into the pot twice, just to be sure, once for the soup and once for what comes after the soup, which is thinner but still hot. You peel vegetables directly over the pot so nothing lands anywhere it won't be used. Hot water is free if the landlady is feeling generous, which she is on Tuesdays and sometimes Thursdays. Summer brings a different problem. The tenement holds heat the way a closed fist holds a stone, and in July and August the unventilated rooms stop being merely uncomfortable and start being genuinely dangerous for anyone under 2. Infant mortality spikes every July with the predictability of a calendar event. The newspapers note it, the city notes it, the rooms don't change. You carry the baby to the fire escape at night, which is the coolest available surface, and you sit there until the child stops fussing or you run out of night, whichever comes first. The building breathes around you. Everyone on every floor is doing some version of the same calculation. You give birth in the same room you live in, with a neighbour or a midwife and no doctor, because a doctor is a sum you simply cannot assemble in time. The risk is real and everyone in the room knows it. Women die in this exact moment more often here than in countries you have never even heard the names of, and the reformers keep saying so to no one positioned to fix it. You do the only thing there is to do, which is the thing itself. Afterward, there is a child, and there is you, and there is the rent, still due. The number is 6 or 7 per thousand. That's the maternal mortality rate in 1920s America, 6 or 7 mothers for every 1,000 births, in a decade when Denmark and the Netherlands have already gotten theirs down to something a fraction of that. The reformers have charts. They bring the charts to committee hearings. The committee hearing runs long and the charts are left behind on a folding chair and nothing about the number changes. The folding chair is the only thing in the building that holds the number for any length of time. Mrs. Wachowski from the floor below is in the room with you, probably, who has done this before, her own 4 times, and twice for a neighbour she barely knows. She is calm, capable, and entirely unhurried. She keeps a clean cloth and a steady voice and asks no questions about where your husband is. She doesn't need to, she already knows. She brought soup last Tuesday, which was not nothing. A midwife, if you can afford one, charges between $3 and $5 for a delivery, which is a week's wages if you're in laundry. And so sometimes Mrs. Wachowski is the whole plan. The insurance agent has been by twice this month already. 5 cents a week from Metropolitan Life, 10 cents from Prudential, collected door to door like a very grim subscription service, except the only person who gets to cancel is the one who dies. You've kept up the payments. You keep up the payments the way you keep the rent current and the bread from going stale, by treating it as non-negotiable. If something happens, there's a $500 benefit waiting, which is roughly what a year of laundry wages looks like before expenses. Some women use it to open a boarding house. Some use it to survive the next 6 months. Some never collect it because the paperwork requires a male relative to sign, and the male relative is the entire reason we're here. The child is 3 days old. You've been back on your feet since yesterday, because back on your feet isn't a choice you get to deliberate. Your eldest, Clara, 11, watches the baby while you take in a basket of washing from the family on the 3rd floor. Clara is very good at watching the baby. She is also supposed to be in school. These 2 facts sit next to each other without resolution, the way most facts in your life currently sit. Margaret Sanger has been saying for years that this is what happens when women have no access to contraception, not just poverty, but specifically this kind of poverty, stacked on top of the kind you already have. The American Birth Control League opened in 1921, and the newspapers have opinions about it, most of them strong. None of them written by women in rooms like yours. The opinions are very confident. None of them has ever once had to boil a bone twice. The conversation is happening in a building you will never enter, about a decision that is yours and isn't. The baby doesn't know any of this. The baby is hungry and warm and making a sound like something that hasn't yet learned what it's been born into. You hold it near the window where the light is better, because the candle is rationed and morning is free. The neighbour who helped you, Mrs. Wachowski, stops by once more on her way out and sets a jar of broth on the table without speaking. She adjusts her coat. She doesn't look back. The jar is still warm. You don't open it yet. You will. You think hard about how many children you can keep alive, which is a different and far heavier question than how many you can have. There is a clinic now, the first of its kind, opened by a woman named Sanger, who argues plainly that a mother with no way to space her children is a mother kept poor on purpose. The law disagrees, loudly and in print, and the information you actually need travels in whispers between women who trust one another. You ask your questions quietly, in kitchens. The answers arrive the same way they were asked. The Comstock laws say the word contraception is obscene. They say this in legal text, which is a document that has never boiled bones twice to stretch a pot of soup. The information circulates anyway, from your neighbour Mrs. Pauker, who learned from the woman below her, who learned at a settlement house meeting nobody officially held. It moves mouth to mouth like a recipe for something you're not supposed to be making. Another child has a cost, and it isn't measured in sentiment. It's measured in dollars. Another birth means a week out of work, minimum, if you're lucky and nothing goes wrong. Another mouth means $3 more a month in food. That's 20 more loaves of bread, which sounds like a lot until you realize you're already counting loaves. Another child means Clara stays home from school longer, which means she learns less, which means her future gets smaller every time yours does. It compounds. The debt has always compounded. Mrs. Kowalczyk on the third floor had 4 children in 6 years after her husband left. She didn't plan 4. She didn't plan any of them after the second. She works the laundry at 6 in the morning and comes home looking thin, grey and faintly chemical, smelling of lye and steam and something you can't identify but that coats the back of your throat. Her youngest is 18 months and cried until August and then simply stopped, which was either a milestone or exhaustion. She doesn't ask any more whether it was one or the other. She has learned to take the quiet. Sanger's American Birth Control League opened in 1921. The nearest clinic to you is not nearby. The nearest doctor who will discuss this openly is, let's say, theoretical. What exists in practice is a pamphlet, occasionally, passed folded in half inside a borrowed book, and a kind of knowledge shared in stages by women who have decided that trusting you with the next piece depends on how you handle the piece before it. It's a slow curriculum. There is no graduation. The law calls this obscenity. You call it arithmetic. A 4th child on $8 a week is a sum you have done at the kitchen table more than once, and it has never once come out. You already know what you'll cut first. The coal goes before the food goes before the rent goes in a letter to the landlord that begins with a promise. A 4th child means the letter doesn't get written at all. It means something else goes instead, something you haven't identified yet because you're still managing 3. You've done the number in your head more than once, not because you want to, because it's already there when you wake up, before the light comes in, before Clara stirs. The number is not how many you want, it's how many the arithmetic will hold. Those are 2 different numbers. They've never been the same. You inherit the farm when your husband dies, which sounds a great deal like security until you actually try to run it. The land is yours on paper, and the labour is yours in fact, but the bank that would lend you the money to plant it wants a man's name set down beside yours on the loan. You no longer have a man's name to offer it. The price of wheat has fallen straight through the floor besides, so even a good harvest is worth less than the seed cost. You stand in a field you own and cannot afford to use. The numbers went wrong a few years before your husband died. Wheat was nearly $3 a bushel in 1919, which was the kind of price that made a man feel like a businessman. By 1922, it's $1.03. The difference between those 2 figures is, in practical terms, the farm. You knew the price had fallen, you didn't know it had taken the future with it when it went. The loan is the next wall. The bank isn't refusing you out of cruelty, the bank is refusing you out of paperwork. In several states, a married woman still can't sign a contract independently, and a widowed one, legally speaking, has only just graduated into the right to try. The loan officer, a man named Clement, slides the application across the desk and looks past you at the door. He is polite, patient, and immovable. He'd like a cosigner, a brother, a father, an uncle with a solid handshake and legible credit history. You don't have any of those. You have a deed and $12 and the coat you wore to the funeral. Clement folds his hands. The meeting is over. The farm itself doesn't wait while you sort this out. The equipment needs a hand to drive it. The soil needs to be turned before the frost makes the question irrelevant. Your eldest, a boy of 13 named Harold, can manage the mule on a straight line but loses control on the turns. You manage the turns. You do this 6 days a week, and on the 7th you account for everything, which takes approximately as long as the other 6 combined. Meanwhile, there's the seed question. Seed requires cash, and cash requires the loan, and the loan requires Clement, who has already given you his answer. Some neighbours extend credit informally, a sack of corn seed against a share of harvest, which is generosity framed as a business arrangement so both parties can pretend it's the latter. You accept it. You don't have the luxury of dignity in this particular transaction. The winters are the part people leave out when they describe farmland as an asset. A ton of coal runs $10 to $14 in 1922, which is most of what you have after the mortgage payment, which is itself a figure that does not negotiate. When the coal runs out in February, and it runs out in February, you burn fence posts. Harold thinks this is interesting. You do not find it interesting. The fence posts are the fence. When spring comes and the cattle wander into the corn, you'll understand exactly what burning the fence cost you. But right now you're choosing between cold and a structural boundary, and cold loses. A widow on a farm in the rural Midwest has essentially no institutional support to appeal to. The mother's pension, such as it is, was written for urban county offices that can at least pretend to administer it. Out here, the county seat is 18 miles away and open Tuesday and Thursday. The pension that was authorized in principle and unfunded in fact is, for you, not even a rumor. It's a story someone heard about a woman in another county who applied twice and got a letter. There's a woman 2 farms over, Edna Rausch, whose husband left 2 autumns ago for a situation in Cincinnati that was never fully explained. Her land is in his name. Edna isn't a widow. She isn't exactly a wife. She's a woman on a farm she can't sell, can't borrow against, and can't legally compel her husband to return to, standing in a field that belongs, on paper, to a man in Cincinnati with a situation. Edna plants anyway. She borrows Harold for the turns. The mule has opinions about this arrangement but keeps them to itself. You learn the small economies of getting a household through a winter, and you learn them so thoroughly they turn into ritual. A soup bone goes into the pot once for the broth, and then a second time, just to be certain it has given up every last thing it had. Vegetable peelings become a thin soup of their own. You do the close handwork by the window in daylight to save the kerosene for after dark. None of it is clever. Exactly. It is simply the set of habits standing between this month and the one where the tin runs empty. The coal is the central problem. A ton costs somewhere between $10 and $14 in 1922 Chicago, which is a number you know the way you know your children's shoe sizes, constantly, anxiously, and in relation to everything else. When the coal runs out before the cold does, which it does, you burn whatever the cold hasn't gotten to first. Furniture goes in stages. A chair goes before the table goes before the floor. You have a system. The shoes are their own line in the ledger. Children's shoes cost between $1.50 and $3, and they wear through in months, because children are structurally committed to destroying shoes. What you do, what everyone does, is cut cardboard to the shape of the sole and press it flat against the inside. It holds for a week if you're careful, 3 days if it rains. Clara Pietrak, who lives 2 floors up and takes in piecework, is quiet, careful, and reliably tired. Her fingers look like a map of somewhere unpleasant, and she keeps a stack of cardboard from cracker boxes specifically for this. She cuts them at the kitchen table with a pair of scissors that are also used for everything else. She doesn't comment on it. Neither do you. Food runs on its own arithmetic. Bread is 10 cents a loaf. A quart of milk is 14 cents, counted against everything else, always. Beans, potatoes, salt, pork. You buy the cheapest cut, and then you cook it until it admits what it is. A family of 3 or 4 eats for somewhere between $12 and $18 a month if you are diligent and lucky and nothing goes wrong. Something always goes wrong. A child gets a cough that requires a nickel remedy from the pharmacy. A boot needs thread. The tin shifts. The kerosene lamp has opinions about all of this. It burns brighter than you need it to when the children are awake, and it requires more oil than the week budgeted for. And when it runs low, it gives a small, judgmental flicker before going dim. You have learned to do everything that requires your eyes before 4 in the afternoon. Mending, writing the rent envelope, reading the letter from your sister in Pittsburgh that arrived 2 weeks ago and has been sitting there because reading it requires sitting down, which requires the day to be over, which it isn't. Winter means the children are inside. Inside means they are loud and cold and hungry in the way that isn't really about food, and your youngest has a cough that has lasted 11 days, which you are monitoring the way you monitor the coal, with total attention and very little power to change the outcome. Tuberculosis killed about 100,000 Americans a year as late as 1927. You know this the way you know not to crowd everyone into one room for warmth, which you do anyway, because the alternative is colder. The tin on the shelf has a specific weight you can identify without opening it. Full sounds one way, 3 weeks left sounds another. Almost nothing produces a sound that is less a rattle and more a small, private verdict. You shake it anyway. You have always shaken it anyway. The number does not change when you do this, but the shaking is part of the ritual, and the ritual is how February becomes March. You feel the floor drop in the autumn of 1929, even though you, of all people, had the least left to lose in the first place. The crash is at first a thing happening to men in distant rooms, and then it is a thing happening to your wages, your hours, the thin charity that was already stretched past breaking. The relief that finally comes is built around a man out of work, a shape your household has never once fit, so you watch help arrive for others and pass you by. You have been managing on nothing for years already. You take in the same belt one more notch. From where you're standing, the crash looks like very little at first. Not the ticker tape, not the panicked brokers. Your version is quieter and arrives slightly later, the way all bad news does when it has to travel through a few extra walls first. The factory cuts its hours. The laundry drops one shift. The woman 2 floors up who used to give you her ironing on Thursday tells you she's doing it herself now. Each subtraction is small. They add up the same way your debt does. The relief programs appear by 1930, and they are organized around a central assumption. The family in crisis has a man at its center who has recently lost work. The breadwinner is temporarily down. The breadwinner will recover. The breadwinner, in your case, does not exist, or left 4 years ago, or is buried in the cemetery on the east side of town. The relief office has a form. The form has a line for husband's name and a line for husband's current employer. Both lines sit there, looking at you. A woman named Mrs. Adeline Voss, who lives on the 3rd floor of your building, tries the relief office in November. She has 2 children, a son who is 9 and a daughter who is 6, and she has been taking in boarders since her husband died of tuberculosis in 1927. She sits across from a caseworker who asks her to describe the household's change in income. Adeline folds her hands in her lap and explains that the income has not changed because there was never very much of it, and the caseworker writes something in his notes and tells her she doesn't qualify under the current criteria. Adeline walks back down 3 flights. She already knew. At the settlement house in December, the same volunteer who took your name 2 years ago turns a new family away at the door because the nursery is full, the pension fund is spent, and her ledger is already crammed with cases she can't get to. She does it gently. She has done it all week. The systems built in the 1920s were built for a man briefly out of work, not for a household that had been scraping bottom for years, so the new wave of need lands directly on top of the old wave that nobody had been counting. You watch her close the door on the family ahead of you, and you understand you have been inside this winter for a long time already. Food prices dropped slightly in the early Depression years, which sounds like relief until you notice your wages drop faster. A loaf of bread that cost 10 cents in 1928 costs 8 cents in 1931. You are earning $2 less a week. The math does not resolve in your favor, and it never has. The caseworker at the relief office keeps a stack of printed cards on his desk, stamped with exactly 3 recognized categories: worthy poor, deserving family, and temporary hardship. He sorts the morning's applicants into the cards the way a man sorts mail: quick, certain, and faintly bored. Your file doesn't slide cleanly into any of them. You are a widow, or you are divorced, or your husband left and you never got a lawyer because $50 was never something you had. So he sets your file to the side, in the small pile of the complicated ones, and reaches for the next clean case. The side pile waits. Some weeks it waits until the funding runs out. Clara Pietrzak knocks on your door on a Tuesday in December and stands in the hallway holding a small paper sack, 2 potatoes and half a cabbage. She doesn't say anything about it being charity. You don't say anything about it being charity. You take the sack, and she goes back to her own rooms, and you stand in your kitchen for a moment holding the weight of it. The floor dropped months ago. You are still standing on it. And there it is, a whole day on the other side of the Roaring Twenties. No jazz, no gin, no Charleston. Just a tin with $1.14 in it, a soup bone going in for its second boiling, a pension that was approved in principle and then quietly ran out of principle, and a clerk who was very sorry and could you come back in January. You counted the coins before dawn. You stood in a laundry at 100 degrees. You cut cardboard to the shape of a small shoe and called it solved, because for one more week it was. You left an 11-year-old named Clara in charge of the morning and trusted her, because she'd earned it and because there was no one else. And the children ate on Tuesday the same as they ate on Monday. It wasn't the decade of the party invitations. It was the quieter one running right beside it. 4 million households the census bothered to count, and plenty it didn't. Women who paid more for worse rooms. Women who wrote letters to a newspaper because the newspaper was the only thing that wrote back. They got up the next morning anyway. Not because it was noble, because morning came, but that was their winter. This one is yours, and it's warmer. Thank you for spending it here, in the cold flat, with the tin and the candle and the girl in the window. It's a gentle place to rest, even when the facts aren't. So let the day go now. Let your shoulders drop down from your ears. Let the blanket turn heavy. Let the cold keep to its own side of a window that, tonight, actually closes. The coal is covered. The rent is paid. Nobody is waiting on January. Sleep well.